Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The blessings of God be upon you with His mercy and His benevolence. That's 2 languages. Any other languages want to try? Anybody speak Egyptian? That's a different language. Zayyak ya afendim. Habibi awi awi. That's how they say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Since I've been practicing psychology, I've been 35 countries actually, and what I've learned is that people are people all over the world, that we have the same basic needs. But the 4 things that I have learned, that there is a God, what goes around comes around, you can never hide the truth, and there is a universal pattern. Now, when we look at the definition of psychology, it's a scientific study of the way that humans think, feel, behave, the way our bodies work and affect our psychology, and the way the environment affects us as a body and psychology, and the way we affect our environment. However, my favorite definition of psychology is actually when my older children were little kids living in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. And at the age of 4, 5, 6, and 7, it's a very impressionable age. It's called the Oedipal complex, where everybody has to be smarter than the others, have a bigger daddy to beat your daddy up, have more camels and goats than yours do, have cousins and things like that. Well, in their competitive nature, my daughter was asked, "What does your daddy do?" And my 5-year-old daughter was so proud that she could say, "My daddy is a psychologist." And for 5 years old, that's pretty remarkable. Because I have master's degree and doctoral degree students that don't even spell it correctly yet. And they were so fascinated that she could even say such a big word. They said, "Well, what does that mean?" She said, "That means my daddy gives people lots of problems." So when we look at psychology, we're looking at the way people balance their lives, the kind of things that they need. And we do know that every single day, people need to have time for work, play, love, and worship. Work is being productive, where you're making a contribution to your community. It involves an income. It could be volunteer work. It could be being a student. It can also be a house parent. You know how many times I hear people say, "Oh, I don't do anything, I'm just a housewife." I don't do anything, I'm just a housewife. Have any of you tried to be a house husband? You will find that it is one of the most exhausting professions. As a matter of fact, the Washington Post, back in the early 80s, did research on the value of a house mom. That she drives, she has to help with the homework, she changes diapers, she entertains her husband, she does all the PTA and PTO things. Her value came to $182,000 a year. Men, we better start saying thank you. Don't you agree? Now, it doesn't just stop there, ladies. You also have to appreciate your husband when he's doing the dishes. Every single day, we have to have time for play. It's a time to recreate, where we recreate non-stressful situations. And it can be being a sports person or having a hobby. And also, we need to have time for our loved ones. And there's 4 kinds of love. There's the love of God, which is called agape. There's the love of your fellow human beings, which is called philos. By the way, that's where the word Philadelphia comes from, the city of brotherly love. Eros, which we won't even talk about, that means romantic love. And then ekouyenia in the Greek means family love. These don't take the place of each other, but they will influence each other. It'd be very unfair for you ladies if you were asked, "Do you love your husband more than you love your son?" Well, even if the intensity is a lot more for one, you still can't compare them. It would be very unfair. Then there's something that we seem to forget about in life, and that's the ethos. Ethos in Greek means ethics, but it also has a very global meaning, living principles. I remember having students in my ethics class, and 26 students came from 8 different languages. So I asked them to group in their languages and come up with the terms in their language for morals and for ethics. And I was so excited that there was a Greek student in the class that said, this is going to be great because most of these words are brought from the Greek. So when it was his turn, he went up and wrote ethics. He wrote ethos. And I said, where's the other word? He said, we Greeks have no morals. So what we're doing here is we have to take time to worship every single day. It doesn't matter whether you believe in organized religion or non-organized. If you have to go through the rituals or if you're spiritual. There's also your mission statement in life. What do you believe is the purpose of life? That's the values and the attitude about life. What makes you unique? Your traditions, your customs. And then, what is the yin-yang of life? Ethics and morals. So work, play, love, and ethos are things that should be done daily. When we are looking at these kind of things also, it's important to remember that we need to be in relationships. It is human nature to want to belong. So human nature says we want to belong. This is an association with two or more people. Could be work, play, love, or your spiritual areas of life. Relationships is composed of two things. There's a sense of belonging, which is based on trust and respect. Well, before you get there, you have to be willing to be vulnerable with that person to be able to reach intimacy and friendship. Well, by definition, belonging is that intimacy and friendship. This is why, by the way, if you want to look at the romantic relationship, there's no such thing as love at first sight. It's impossible. How can you look at somebody and say, I trust you and I respect you, let's get married? Girls, that doesn't work, by the way, in case somebody ever tries that with you. And the other thing at work as well. When people try to create jobs for people in their own image, it's not going to happen in the first interview. What we talk about, however, is that same commitment area that I just mentioned a little while ago in your ethos. That's actually the sustainer of a long-term relationship. When people have similarities in their ideology, their traditions, their yin-yang, it becomes easier for them to have a long-term relationship. And because that sense of belonging is learned, it's not an emotion like people think, it's easier to get there. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to be from the same nationality, the same religion, the same political influence, the same looks or anything like that to get along. But the closer you are, the easier it is, according to the research in psychology. So what we look at then is how do we communicate effectively? There has to be a sender, there has to be a receiver to get a message. Well, when a sender sends that message, they have to encode what they mean. The receiver has got to decode what they think the sender actually meant. Here's what happens in the communications model. A person will say something or do something, that's called a behavior. The other person will interpret based on their experience, not what the first person actually intended. Then they're going to feel it, and then they're going to think it, before they come back with an intention that has its behavior. Many of you are shaking your head like you're already married. This could be at work also. So what happens then is we have that classical conditioning situation. Everybody remember Pavlov's dog? From basic psychology class? Well, this is not the latest research. There's actually much, much more research, but I thought I'd simplify it, because at my age, 147 years old, it's much easier to keep things simple. And what we'll realize is when Pavlov gave the meat to the dog salivated. That's called an unconditioned response. The dog didn't have to learn to do that. And then what he did, he associated the meat presentation with the bell. And he kept doing that presentation for a while until he took the meat out, only rang the bell, and guess what? The dog salivated. A conditioned response. Now, of course, in the Arab world, they say, meat marab until like not to do this. But we're talking about a different kind of meat, right? In human relations, what we find is that the meat represents something that is upsetting, traumatizing, and stressful. And the normal reaction to that is going to be anxiety and agitation. Well, if you associate a person, a place, or a situation with that negative situation, even when the meat is not there, you'll still have the reaction that's negative. So guess how your interpretation is going to be? But of course, it's always the fault of the other person. You have to be careful what you say to people, too, because don't think that one negative is proportionally and ratioed 1-to-1 with a positive. So if you say something hurtful to your spouse, to somebody at work, you can't just say, oh, I'm sorry. It doesn't work that well. One mild negative takes 5 positives to balance it out. One moderate negative takes 7 to 10 positives to balance it out. And one severe negative can take more than 18 positives to balance it out. So guys, when you go home and you've had a long day at work, and you look at your wife and say, you know something? You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen in my life. And then she has this wonderful smile, and you think, wait a minute, I have to be truthful with you. I'm very tired. You could be ugly. I can't tell. It's not going to get you anywhere. That's pretty severe. From you girls, how many of you think that's severe? How many of you think that's just mild? How many of you are not married yet? That's why you didn't raise your hand, of course. In the Indian language, we have this beautiful word called ashram. Ashram can mean your family, your neighborhood, your city, your state, your country, or the world. Unfortunately, today, we have dysfunctional ashrams. And these are communities where the members are treated unfairly. Now, this community could be the workplace, it could be the home, it could be your government. It could be anywhere where people are treated with bias and prejudice. What happens with people who are treated with bias and prejudice and treated unequally, they will feel very dysfunctional because everybody has a need to feel equal because they want to feel respected. They need protection and provisions. They need nourishment and they need bonding. Well, what we see then is that in a dysfunctional nation, people who don't get that will have panic, hypersensitivity, paranoia, and they will fear rejection, abandonment, and neglect. And I'm feeling very neglected by this thing because it won't change the screen for me. And I've been very nice with Ya Habibi. Okay, now we're happy. Happiness is something that we all want, but people have different definitions of happiness. And I'll tell you now, definitions of happiness doesn't include money or materialistic things. The research is absolutely enormous about what is happiness. Remember we went over the relationship model? Well, if you put all of this together and you can define happiness with your spouse, your family members, your co-workers, the people in your community, you'll come up with happiness, which is mutual cooperation. That's actually what happiness is. So any of you who are running for the Miss Universe contest or Mr. Universe contest, one of the questions you're going to be asked right after the bathing suit contest. Can you imagine some of these guys in the bathing suit? What's happiness? You're going to win. Because you're going to say, oh, it's mutual cooperation. And they'll say, good, you won. Happiness is not all those materialistic things. As a matter of fact, the research has not changed in 29 years. From far back as 1981, when people were asked, what is the worst part of the day? It's usually when there's been conflict with people that they care about. Just a few years ago, actually it was last year, 2010, the research actually showed that the best thing that happens is when there is positive interaction between the people that you care about. That's really what happiness is. No person has ever been on their deathbed and said, I wish I would have spent more time in the office and made more money. So what we find then is a lot of interesting ventures take place when we seek happiness. And we know that there are givens. People want a balance in their life. They need to also have a sense of belonging that is unconditional. They also want to be understood, appreciated, trusted, respected, whether it's at home, recreation, whether it's at work or at worship. Interesting, in the world today, we see where the countries are that have happiness. The number one country, according to the research, is actually Denmark. You're going to be very pleased to find out that I just skipped a slide. Over here is Oman and the Emirates, the second and the third happiest countries in the world. The communities that have a cooperative nature in their being, the families, the government, the programs that are done together. This is not my research, so it's not toughness that we're giving you. This is actual research that was done by other psychologists, other sociologists around the world. Now, when we're looking at families, the workplace, I'm going to quote what the president of one of the divisions of the United Nations said. He said, "A human family is one. Like any family, it needs a home, a place to come together. And the United Nations aspires to be that home." It's very important that we also realize that being human, to be a human being, we are actually together as one body with many parts. And any impairment or injustice to any part of the universal body is dysfunctional. And therefore the response is going to be rejection, abandonment, and neglect of all those parts. We are human models. And it's very important that we not just do this for our environment and our workplace, we also do it for the family. Because I don't want you to have a 10-year-old son who one day goes to prayer, as this little boy did. And he says, "Dear God, all I want for Christmas is a 10-speed bike." 1 week passes, and the little boy's a little concerned about his negotiations with God. So he figured, okay, 3 weeks before Christmas, I better do something really good to get God convinced that I just want that bicycle. And 3 weeks before Christmas, he says, "Dear God, not only do I just want a bicycle only, I promise, I will be the best brother my sisters have ever had. They're going to love me." 1 more week passes by, and here it is, 2 weeks before Christmas, and the kid's getting really nervous because he noticed his dad and mom bargain a lot with each other, and the way dad handles business deals. So this time he goes back to God. He says, "Dear God, all I want is that bicycle. Not only will I be the best son, I'll be the best brother. I'll be now the best son for my parents. They're going to be writing books that psychologists will talk about at TEDx." Wallah. Now it's 1 week before Christmas. The boy's really scared. He's really nervous that he's not going to get that negotiations of that bicycle that he's been wanting. He's been studying how his dad handles business. He goes down to the local Catholic church where there's a nativity scene. He steals the statue of the Virgin Mary, and he brings it home, puts it in his closet. This time he goes back to prayer. "Dear Jesus, if you ever want to see your mother again..." In a positive life, we want to communicate effectively so we can have better understanding. We want to have conflict resolution strategies, and we want to have the desire to continue to cooperate. Human beings sit in an infinite space, a home where we can learn the secrets of life, to recognize and respect one another, to protect and provide, nourish and bond with every person worldwide. I'm Raymond Hamden. I'm a citizen of the human race on planet Earth. Please join me as we continue to have proper relations and a prosperous resolution.